We will praise you, O Lord, with all heart. We will show forth all your marvelous works. And we'll be glad and rejoice in you. We'll sing praise to your name, O Most High. Bless the Lord in spite of everything. Max Kellerman, on First Take, spoke about the legacy of Floyd Mayweather. And his thing was that Floyd Mayweather's legacy was risk versus reward. This is what he brought to the game, that you try to get as much reward as you can and lower your risk as much as possible. And he thought that this was changing the game for the younger fighters. He went on to say that, the fans and the promoters, they really exploited fighters, and Floyd flipped the script and exploited the fans and the fighters by going with the highest reward for the lowest risk. And so he said he didn't fight certain fighters at a certain time, didn't fight other younger fighters, etc. Now, when I listened to Kellerman's argument, while there is one or two areas of validity in it, a lot of it is false in terms of Floyd Mayweather originating this idea of high reward, low risk, and trying to avert from high risk, low reward. I'll give you a good example of this, where actually Floyd Mayweather, back in 2005, Floyd Mayweather faced a fighter in the name of Henry Bracellus. So if I go into Mayweather's archives here, he faced a fighter named Henry Bracellus back in 2005, January of 2005. At this point in time, Floyd Mayweather was a junior welterweight. And at the end of that, he called out a fighter named Shane. He called out certain fighters. He called out Arturo Gatti. He called out Costa Tszyu. And then he said, if Shane Mosley's coming down to welterweight, I would like to face Shane Mosley. If Oscar De La Hoya is coming down to welterweight, I would like to face Oscar De La Hoya. Now, after he said this very emphatically, as you can see here in the video, there was Jim Lampley's comments and Roy Jones' comments, in which Jim Lampley said he's not sure if Oscar or Shane Mosley would want to face Floyd Mayweather at this time. To which Roy Jones Jr. made the comments that, Floyd would have everything to gain and nothing to lose, and Oscar and Shane Mosley would have everything to lose and nothing to gain. So it would really be a stupid idea for them to actually face Floyd Mayweather, but you never know in boxing. Now, I thought that was very interesting. And later on, Larry Merchant actually would go on to interview Shane Mosley after his second fight with Fernando Vargas, after he had knocked him out again, and asked him about Floyd, and Shane Mosley talked about his tooth and stuff. But when you really think about it, what Roy Jones Jr. said makes a lot of sense, and I'll explain to you what I mean. So even though Floyd Mayweather in 2005 recently became Ring Magazine's pound-for-pound #1 in the world, that's at the end of 2005, because Bernard Hopkins got beaten by one of the, I can't remember if it was light heavyweight champions, or it could have been a middleweight champion, I can't remember which one. Jermaine Taylor, I think it was. But anyway, Floyd Mayweather became pound-for-pound #1 in the world. But even though he became pound-for-pound #1 in the world, what people don't know is, after he faced Henry Bracellus and beat him, he had never had a pay-per-view fight, ever. So why would Shane Mosley and Oscar De La Hoya be interested in Floyd Mayweather if he's not a pay-per-view attraction? And that's what Roy Jones Jr. was speaking about, that they would have everything to lose because by facing Floyd, they're not going to make as much money as they would normally make with another hyper fighter in their weight class, even though he just became pound-for-pound #1 in the world. And Floyd would have everything to gain and nothing to lose, because Floyd would be moving up in weight to face them, first of all, so which means he would get credit for moving up in weight. 2, whether he beats them or not, he's a smaller fighter. So they're not going to get credit for beating a smaller fighter, even though Shane Mosley went up in weight and faced Oscar De La Hoya and beat him. And then, peradventure, Floyd beats them, then that would look bad on them. And Floyd would become a pay-per-view attraction at their expense. So, when you look at risk versus reward, which is a law that is unspoken about, it's not an official law, but it's an unspoken law in boxing, it has to make business sense. You hear Andre Ward say it, you hear a lot of fighters say it. It has to make sense for me to face this fighter. What they're saying is that when I examine the risk and I examine the reward, I'd be foolish to just go and risk everything against a fighter who's not giving me that financial gain that I should possibly get for the fight. It's common sense. And Roy Jones Jr. said that way back when Floyd Mayweather was trying to get the fights that he would really wanted to get. He was hungry. Okay? So this is why I say that Max Kellerman is not speaking the truth when he says that Floyd is the one, sort of the architect behind this. No, it's been around for a long time. Floyd Premier vocalized it, but it's been around for a very long time. Okay, I can give you several examples of other fighters who did not face other fighters coming up because of this. Now, let's go on to another point that I want to make. So the other point that I want to make is that when you look at risk versus reward in boxing, and sometimes you're ready to jump on a fighter and say, why didn't this fighter face this fighter at this time? It has to do with, even if the fighter was to beat the other fighter, as happened with, say, for instance, the Charlos with J-Rock and the other fighter, which I can't remember his name right now, who got knocked the spark out by both the Charlo brothers. Now, how much credit are they going to get for those guys? Yeah, they weren't defeated fighters. They were seen as threats, but they were not as experienced as the Charlo brothers. So, you don't get a whole lot of credit for it. And then, the reward, as I said before, is very low, and the risk factor is still high. They could have even faced a better prepared fighter in their weight class and get much more credit, reward for it. Not necessarily financial gain all the time. I'll give you an example of risk versus reward, which is not necessarily financial gain. Mikey Garcia versus Errol Spence Jr. Both of them are not pay-per-view fighters. But Errol Spence Jr. is a much bigger fighter because he's been in welterweight longer than Mikey Garcia. However, Mikey Garcia called out Errol Spence, and he's jumped up supposedly 2 weight classes to face him. If you pay attention, Mikey Garcia and Errol Spence are around about the same height, and Mikey Garcia has proven that he could fight at super junior welterweight, so he's really moving up 1 weight class. The risk versus reward for Mikey Garcia is low. His risk is low compared to his reward. If he goes up a weight class, Errol Spence beats him, stops him, whatever, no one's going to say anything because he's a smaller fighter. However, if he goes the distance with Errol Spence or beats Errol Spence, huge rewards. On Errol Spence's end of the spectrum, he sees this smaller fighter that he can beat. 2, he wasn't getting any fights, so he's happy to fight someone with a name. Mikey Garcia has a name, he has a reputation, he has a lot behind him. So when you think about risk versus reward, and the fact that this makes the fight into a pay-per-view fight, you can see why it makes sense for both fighters who are not pay-per-view fighters to face each other. So risk versus reward is something you have to pay attention to in boxing. And when you do, it really helps you to get a better perspective on why fighters face each other. It's not that fighters don't have a problem. They've been in the amateurs. They face each other in the amateurs. They do what they do. No fighter avoids a fighter in the amateurs. But in professional boxing, you will find that fighters sometimes, with negotiations, especially with the negotiations for the money and stuff, you find that fighters say, okay, this is not worth my while at this time. This doesn't make financial sense, or this is not worth my time at this time, because even if I beat this fighter, I'm not going to get credit for it. So it's those kinds of things you have to look at when you look at risk versus reward. Now, how it appears is based on the promoters. A lot of times, promoters can sabotage athletes. We've seen Bob Arum sabotage Guillermo Rigondeaux, sabotage Floyd Mayweather. We've seen announcers like Jim Lampley and Larry Merchant sabotage Roy Jones Jr. Andre Ward, Bernard Hopkins. And so they give you that impression that these fighters didn't face the best competition at the time, and that, a fighter just jumps in and fights another fighter that doesn't care about money and all of that. It's not true at all. When I listen to Max Kellerman talk about Pacquiao model, how Pacquiao fought everyone at the right time and etc., that's not true. A perfect example is, if you're saying that Pacquiao fought everyone at the right time, then what happened with Floyd Mayweather? If you're arguing that he didn't face Floyd Mayweather, he faced Floyd Mayweather too late, you can't say that he faced everyone at the right time. All right? So, if you're saying he faced Floyd Mayweather too late, then you have to stay with that. If you're saying that he fought everyone at the right time, then he faced Floyd Mayweather at the right time. You got to stick with that. Risk versus reward. So let's go into some examples of where Manny Pacquiao looked at the risk, looked at the reward, and his team decided for him to face certain fighters. Risk versus reward. Very easy with Manny Pacquiao. Manny Pacquiao could have fought. He could have fought Shane Mosley back in 2010. Even back in 2009, after Mosley defeated Antonio Margarito. Shane Mosley was not a big pay-per-view attraction, but he was a pay-per-view. He had been on some pay-per-views with Oscar De La Hoya. He was a big name. Manny Pacquiao's team, including Freddie Roach, thought that Shane Mosley was too big, too strong, and so they decided, we're not going to face Shane Mosley. So Shane Mosley ended up facing Floyd Mayweather. Now, the thing about it is, when you look at the equation there, is Freddie Roach wrong for thinking that? Shane Mosley destroyed Antonio Margarito. Why would Manny Pacquiao go in to face a guy who could box and destroy another fighter? The appearances look really sketchy. So, risk versus reward. They waited for Shane Mosley to look like he was more vulnerable. So after Shane Mosley had been beaten up by Floyd Mayweather, and then he struggled in his next fight, it showed that it seemed as though he lost a touch or two. So now Freddie Roach felt encouraged to face Shane Mosley. And so they took the fight in 2011. Now, here's the question many people miss. Was Manny Pacquiao's team wrong for doing so? No. Low risk, high reward. They studied Shane Mosley. They had time to look at him. Okay, let's get it going. Freddie Roach was very honest about it. So when Max Kellerman says Manny Pacquiao fought everyone at the time that he needed to fight them and so on, it's not true. The fight against Shane Mosley was sensational, but it wasn't true that he faced Shane Mosley at the time when he could have faced Shane Mosley. So that's not true. However, when you're applying the law of low risk, high reward, that's what they went with. And this is something that you can look at in history. Sugar Ray Robinson, for example. His manager did not think that it was a good matchup between him and Charlie Burley. Why? Charlie Burley was one of those fighters that was avoided in boxing. The fight would have been high risk, low reward. Not only would the fight not be as exciting because it's two counterpunchers and two guys who are defensive fighters, but also, in addition to that, it will be a fight in which Charlie Burley, which is a relatively unknown name in boxing at the time, compared to Sugar Ray Robinson, who had a style of fighting which would not encourage fans to actually go see the fight. How would they promote the fight? Didn't look like a good look for Sugar Ray Robinson. So, since the risk was higher than the reward, Sugar Ray Robinson intended to go face one of those other guys that he usually faced and rake in some dough. And he knew that he would have the audience that would want to see how the fight would turn out. So what you have also is styles in fighting. Sometimes guys face a certain style of fighting. It's not that they can't face other styles of fighting, but they know the audience is going to come to see them face a certain style of fighting. Right? So it's all of that stuff you have to factor into the equation when we talk about high risk, low reward. And Roy Jones Jr. knows this very well as well. Roy Jones Jr. decided that he wasn't going to go across to Germany to face a dude when he had most of the belts, even though the guy was supposedly the linear champion at the time because he had beaten Vernon. I forgot what the guy's name is. That's terrible. But so Roy Jones Jr. said, come across to America. This is the Mecca of boxing. Dude didn't want to do that, so Roy Jones Jr. decided, we won't have the fight then. Now, is Roy Jones Jr. wrong for doing that? No. In Germany, a lot of people got robbed when fights go the distance. We're not saying that Roy wouldn't have gone that the fight with Roy would have gone the distance in Germany, but since Roy was the guy with most of the belts and everything, it would have made sense for the guy to come all the way across from Germany to face Roy. The guy never left Germany to face anybody. Okay? The guy wanted to call shots and have Roy come across to Germany. You got to think. High risk, low reward. I go to Germany, I get robbed. He comes across the United States, he gets a fairer fight. Why not? So it's these kinds of things that you have to factor in boxing. When you think of Anthony Joshua versus, say, any one of the guys, Tyson Fury or even Deontay Wilder, you have to think risk versus reward. If you want to get your reward higher for the same risk, then you got to put yourself in a position of leverage. Anthony Joshua put himself in a certain position of leverage, but then he realized when Tyson Fury faced Deontay Wilder, he had to change the game to make himself more relevant. He couldn't just stay in the United Kingdom, which is why he's come across the seas into New York, Madison Square Gardens, to face Jarrell Baby Miller. And if he gets a legitimate win over Jarrell Baby Miller, who is an up-and-coming boxer, even though Jarrell Baby Miller has not done any pay-per-view, and he's still coming, he's a hungry boxer coming up. If he gets the win over them, he gets some leverage to show, hey man, I'm really the real deal here. Now you guys come to me. Deontay Wilder, even though he's a free agent, was working with Showtime, and he works with Al Hain. When you look at Tyson Fury, he put himself in a position where he could leverage things. So he overseas, he's with, I think it's McGuigan or whatever the guy's name is. You guys help me here. And it's not McGuigan. I can't remember what his name is though. But he's with the UK broadcasting network across there, and with the UK promoter that he's with. And in the United States, he's with Top Rank Promotion, and he's with ESPN in the United States. So he's got himself a platform in the United States so that if someone wants to face him, they can come to him as well. So there's some more negotiation so you can get more money. So why are these guys doing that? Because you have to look at risk versus reward. If I can get more money for myself, why wouldn't I put myself in a position to do so? Shane Mosley, Oscar De La Hoya, Roy Jones Jr., Antonio Tarver, and many, many boxers throughout history have done this. It's not the first time. It's not going to be the last time. Sugar Ray Robinson wouldn't show up. She said, look, man, I'm not going to fight no fight if I'm not getting paid the right amounts of money. And I need to get paid in advance, and I got to get paid when I'm done with the fight. Risk versus reward. Because he was a black fighter and so on, he needed to get paid. He didn't want people making promises, and then the promoter doesn't even cough up the money when you need to cough up the money. We heard Manny Pacquiao say he didn't even get paid for the Jeff Horn fight. And these things happen. I've heard other fighters talk about they haven't been paid for certain fights, and certain fighters owe them money. All these things happen in boxing. So you have risks versus reward. Even though it's alleged that you made, $5 million or $4 million, we learn later on you didn't collect all your money. Floyd Mayweather said he didn't even collect all his money from some fight in Top Rank, and so on and so on and so on. This is the way how boxing goes. So when we think of risk versus reward, we have to pay attention to what these guys are talking about. It's not just business aspects when we talk about risk versus reward, but it's also what kind of position I'm in, what I am doing for myself, what I'm doing for my legacy in boxing. And all boxers do that because it's called prize fighting. Professional boxing is not the amateurs. Now, back in the day, way back in the day, early 1900s, people didn't think of boxing that way. They just boxed. And they boxed everyone and anyone, and they didn't care. And they were exploited for that. They got paid money, but they were exploited as well because there were racial barriers between people. Certain people just didn't have opportunities that the people today have. Now, boxing has come a long way from that, since the 1940s, the 1930s, 40s, 50s. Boxing has changed significantly from that. Now, why I say this is because it's important for you to understand that as boxing evolved and we have what we call levels to boxing, now we have people you would look at the people of the debutantes, and then we have the young up-and-coming boxers, then we have the contenders, we have the gatekeepers, we have the champions, when we got the guys who are legends in boxing, with that kind of strata that we have in boxing. And then you got the pay-per-view stars or the stars in boxing. With that strata in boxing, that is where now folk at the top level would face folk at the top level. Because you had multiple belts, it made sense. And then when you had certain attributes that made you a pay-per-view star, this happened with Sugar Ray Leonard, with Muhammad Ali, with Oscar De La Hoya, Roy Jones Jr., Floyd Mayweather, James Toney, and we can just go on and on and on with the different fighters, Julio Cesar Chavez, and Pernell Whitaker, etc. With the stardom that happened in boxing, it made for big fights. So you'll hear a lot of boxers and a lot of fighters talk about, once they attain championship level, they'll talk about, I'm really looking forward to big fights. And you'll hear them talk about not taking a step backwards and facing someone who's on the up and coming. You hear the Charlo brothers say that same thing. They're not on my level. You hear people talk about different levels in boxing and stuff like that. And what they're really talking about is they want to face guys on their level so that not only will it impact on their resume of who they beat, but also they want big fights. They want fights which people will talk about afterwards that would make them stars. And then after they are stars, they hopefully make big money in pay-per-view events. And these are things that people don't understand. And so Muhammad Ali was an excellent businessman when it comes to that. And even though he got robbed of some money by his manager, he was excellent in selling himself. And because he had personality and so on, he was able to make these big fights with big money events. His promoter, Don King, who stole a lot of his money as well. But at the end of the day, it's about selling a product. It's prize fighting. And so how you sell your product and how you go about doing things, it determines the risk versus reward. A lot of people like to quote Muhammad Ali. He faced everyone in his division. But he better. He only got one division. He didn't have multiple divisions and multiple opponents and multiple threats, and some threats better than others. So he should have faced everybody in his division. But it's not the same thing when you're talking about somebody who's moving up multiple weight classes, like Manny Pacquiao, like Floyd Mayweather. You have to examine risk versus reward. And so these are some of the things I noticed that some of you guys kind of miss out when talking about boxing. You don't seem to understand the principle of risk versus reward. I thought I'd just share it with you guys because risk versus reward has been around for quite a while, and it's not something that Floyd Mayweather created a blueprint for. No. Even the way how Floyd Mayweather fights, okay? Even the way how he fights, especially later on in his career when he was at the top, is something that many boxers before him have done, just didn't put it together in a package quite as clinic as he has done it. But you can think of guys like Pernell Whitaker, like I said, Charlie Burley, even Sugar Ray Robinson to some degree, even though he got hit quite a lot. You listen to guys like Sugar Ray Leonard talk about hit and not get hit. So there have been a number of guys. The thing with most of these boxers that talk about Floyd Mayweather is they always wanted a guy like Floyd Mayweather to close the show. Now, Floyd Mayweather generally closed the show up till very recently. In the last 20, 30 seconds, he would just throw a barrage of punches, Oscar and him or whoever. He would throw a barrage of punches. But of late, he has not been doing that. He just move around the ring and just wait, just burn out the time, burn out the clock. Now, of late, Floyd Mayweather hasn't been facing boxers, but he's been facing other guys who decided to enter the boxing ring with him, so he's been stopping them. and he's probably going to do it again with another fighter. I don't know who it is, but I noticed he's been facing southpaws. So I'm assuming that he is still looking at Manny Pacquiao and fighting Manny Pacquiao. He just wants to kind of keep himself kind of warmed up a bit. Nonetheless, the point is that when you look at, forget Floyd Mayweather for a minute, look at every other boxer in boxing. You even hear guys like Gervonta Davis talk about, he doesn't want to face yet the young fighter from Golden Boy who's excellent. He says he's too green. That wouldn't make sense for me to face him at this point in time. Why? I beat a green fighter. I'm not going to get credit for that. And on top of that, I ain't going to make no money off of it. We want to make money. So that would be a reward that's lower for the risk that he would face. Even if the risk goes up because the fighter becomes better and better at what he's doing. Ryan Garcia, that is. That's okay once the reward goes up as well. So he's not going to get much of a reward by facing Ryan Garcia so early in Ryan Garcia's career, which makes sense. When Sugar Ray Leonard faced Thomas the Hitman Hearns, they both were world champions. So it made sense for them to face each other. Just like how Jarrett Hurd faced Erislandy Lara. Two champions face each other. When you're a world champion, you're at a certain level. So it's great to see two champions face each other to get a unified champion. And, of course, we get exciting matches anyway. But my point being that even how the guys fight, even when Sugar Ray Leonard was facing Thomas the Hitman Hearns, Hearns was trying to box him. And that's because, why wouldn't Hearns just bang with Leonard? Just go in and just bang with him. He's got to knock out power. Why didn't he just bang with Leonard? No, he's lowering his risks to get more reward. And Leonard realized he had to commit now to getting closer to Hearns, close that distance. Otherwise, he's going to get creamed on the outside. So what does Leonard do? He has to get to the inside because it lowers his risk and increases his reward. So even in boxing fights, boxers do that. Okay, there are few boxers out there, like John Molina, who are rock and sock and robots. They just go in and just fight. But most boxers, they use strategy. I don't care who they are, whether they're boxers that close the distance to fight on the inside or what. They all use strategy to fight, and that just makes sense. You can't just go in there and just be throwing your hands. Okay, you always like to say he needs to let his hands go. Well, how is he going to let his hands go? I always say it's not just about letting your hands go in boxing. It's about figuring out the timing or what you have to do so that when you let your hands go and you want to throw combinations that you practice, that you're in a position where you're not going to get tagged like that. You don't want to just get tagged up. Okay? Everybody praises Arturo Gatti versus Mickey Ward. Right? I think it was the first fight. But honestly speaking, Arturo Gatti messed up big time against Mickey Ward. Okay? He rectified it in the second and third fights, but the point is, he messed up big time against Mickey Ward. Mickey Ward was a tough customer. But the point is, you're not just going to abandon all the skills and abilities you have to face another fighter. Even if you have to walk that fighter down, like Mayweather did against Ab Judah, like Andre Ward did against Sergey Kovalev. Even if you're going to walk that fighter down, you're going to do it intelligently. Even GGG versus fighters, that he faced. Canelo, when he's walking down Erislandy Lara. You want to face these guys and minimize your being hit. You want to minimize that. You're not into the business to get hit up all the time. So when Max Kellerman talked about, fans want to see fights where there's lots of blood and gore and guts, that's partially true. But boxing has always been a sport where boxers have not tried to be that, unless they don't have the skill level to get through any other way, so they have to go through like that, go through hell. But most of the times, boxing has never been that way. You look at most of the fights, and they've always been, now, when two fighters sometimes have equal skill levels, and now it's about who wants it more. Some people have to go through fire. It ends up being a real fight, and it's kind of a battle of attrition. That happens sometimes, and we're impressed by the ability for these fighters to will their way to the finish line. But at the end of the day, that's never what the plan is for the fighters. The fighters are not just going in there to get beaten up, okay? And we've seen what happened to Brandon Rios, and his career is kind of pretty much over. It's not something that the fighters ever have in their minds. So for people who think, and even the fighter who gets tagged up the most, you know, he is learning skills and abilities when he's practicing to go into a fight, so he doesn't get tagged up as much as he could get. You know, rolling punches, moving punches. Even if he's getting tagged, he's rolling punches and stuff. You don't want to get brain damage for the rest of your life and be sipping out a straw. You know what I mean? And that's what a lot of people don't get, right? So it's always been that rule of low risk, high reward has always been there. I just wanted to stress this in this video, which is pretty long. I hope you guys enjoy your day. You guys have a great one.